everyone, and welcome back. So today we're talking about Scenes from a Marriage episode 3, and I was Team John up until the end of this episode, and all I have to say is toxicity comes in all shapes and sizes. And the first time I watched it, in comparison to the second time, there's a lot to read into, so I recommend you watch it twice. And one thing is very clear, right? Like, we know that Mira is somebody who needs company. She's very dependent on other people. Like, she cannot really be alone. But what wasn't clear up until this episode is Jonathon. Jonathon is someone who, at the end of the day, will always accept Mira back because his euphoria is that he needs her to need him, right? He really likes being in that role of caregiver, it seems, and like being the one to take care. And I didn't really notice it up until the end of this episode. So the episode starts off and we are 1 year later, and so much has changed and nothing has changed. And you see that when we see Mira for the first time. So she still has the same erratic energy, the same sort of chaotic energy that she had at the end of the last episode. Whereas John seems more calm, right? Especially when you compare him to the end of the last episode where he broke the phone. Like he was just done. But as the episode goes on, you realize that John doesn't have it as together as he would like us to believe. The first thing we kind of notice is Mira's new look, right? And her body language has totally changed. She went from kind of pushing him away to kind of really embracing him throughout this episode. But it's kind of like two extremes, right? She went from kind of being repelled by him to like forcibly like trying to like pull him in, right? So she looks great and he's like, "What happened to your hair, girl? Like what this and that," and like kind of really complimenting her. And she comes in and she's looking around the house and she's noticing that a lot of things have changed, right? She's noticing, for example, there's a new couch, and she's like, "You know, we could have gone shopping together." And he's like, "Yeah, like I'm sure we could have." And his response to everything she has to say takes on a different meaning the second time you watch this episode, right? With the knowledge that John knows that this poly guy broke up with her. Because there are a few instances where I couldn't tell if he was taking digs at her or he was just kind of like opening, letting her know that he has her back. Like, I couldn't really tell the difference. So she's going around the house and she notices like, oh, he brought back this dinner sort of ritual or tradition. And he says, "Oh, this is really good for our daughter. It brings stability and, community and, it pretty much implying something that you don't have, right?" So as John is talking about the house and, the things that have changed, you realize that, again, he doesn't have it as together as he would like us to believe. First of all, they no longer live upstairs. So he packed up not only his room, but his child's room as well, and they live downstairs. And as you're looking around the house, this does not look like the house of someone who has it together, right? Who has fully moved on. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And so finally, they stop beating around the bush, and Mira pretty much tells them exactly what she came for, which is that she got a promotion, and she would like them to move to London with her. So as we know, Mira is the breadwinner of the house. She's the one who makes the most money. And according to what she's saying, she has done such a great job in this 1 year that she was away from him that she was able to get this crazy promotion, move to Europe, and something's got to change, right? Like, she can't really fly back to the US, so they kind of have to come with her. And he is not having it, right? He is not having it. It's like a solid no. And not only is it a no, there's just nothing to suggest that he's even almost open to it, right? He's like, this is out of the question. She has friends here, she has family, this is stability, right? You're moving us into the unknown, and maybe that's cool for you, but that's not cool for us. And so for him to kind of like counteract this conversation, he talks about divorce, right? He's like, okay, maybe we should get divorced, maybe we should get these finalized, maybe we should do this. And as soon as he brings up divorce, he knows that it's going to trigger her, because he knows that in the back of his mind, he knows that he's her only option, right? So she talks about divorce, and Mira's reaction to the divorce was just like, "Oh, why do you want to get divorced so fast? Like, just relax. Like, there's no rush to this whole thing. Are you seeing someone?" Like, she has this kind of obsession about whether or not he's seeing somebody or he's remarried. And she kind of even brings up the fact like, "Hey, why don't we talk about it? Like, you can totally be open with me, at the same time, she's not really telling him the full truth about why she's really there and what happened to her relationship. And while they're talking about divorce, he starts smoking again. And I thought it was weird that he was smoking because he is asthmatic. And also, I'm not sure if he was calling his own bluff, because this is not a man who wants to get divorced. And it's very clear by the end of the episode, like, he does not want to get divorced. He still wants to be with her. And what that says about him, you guys let me know. So as he's smoking, he's still reiterating, right? Like, he's kind of trying to get under her skin, and he's like, it's time to move on. And they have this entire lovely conversation about moving on and what it means to have a home. And Mira kind of, says, at some point, there's not going to be any traces left of me in this house. Because as we've seen, John kind of packed everything up, and he pretty much pushed her to the back of his mind, right? It doesn't seem like he's dealing with it. It seems like he's packed her up and left her upstairs, and that's not something he wants to deal with. And she kind of makes a comment saying, like, it doesn't matter where I go, the myth of a home, like, nowhere is stable or secure. And I can understand what she's saying in terms of this idea of stability, like staying in one place and doing the same thing over and over again. The idea of stability, home is where the heart is, essentially. It doesn't matter where you are, like, you have to be okay with yourself. Like, if you feel insecure in one place, you're going to feel insecure regardless of where you go, right? And so Mira kind of is living the American dream. She has this beautiful apartment. She says, as far as she's concerned materially, she has everything she loves, but it's not really doing anything for her. And then she kind of makes the added comment of saying, that's what kind of broke us up. The reason that we're not together is because we value objects too much, right? This house became an object. We became an object. Like, everything became a means to an end, and we kind of lost the meaning in all of it. And I don't know how much I was buying that argument, especially with the knowledge that this poly guy broke up with her. But a lot of her points were valid. I think she did have a point in terms of this traditional idea where stability is you have a house, you have a community, and the longer you stay in a place, the more stable you are, right? And nowadays, like, John said something pretty condescending, your global village, and, I get that you don't think this is cool, but this is a very condescending way of looking at it, because we don't really have any alternatives. And I think by inviting him to London, she was maybe opening up a door saying, listen, this isn't working for you. This isn't working for me. Maybe you should work with me, and we can maybe design something that will work for both of us. And so I do agree with what she was saying in terms of location, right? Just because so many of us have not, we're essentially working towards retirement, right? Like, you find somebody, but like, we don't have any alternatives, or if there are alternatives, those alternatives are not seen as stable, right? Because when you look at their house and you look at everything they have, this is stability, right? Like, this is like the definition of stability, or so it seems. And yet it all fell apart. So what does that say? So she did have a point in that regard. And John's response was kind of petty, in my opinion. He was like, I don't know what it is about your need to diminish everything we have. And she wasn't diminishing anything, right? All she was saying is that this idea of stability, like being in one place, doing the same thing every day, that's not stability. Stability is within you. Home is where the heart is. And moving to London, it doesn't matter where you go. Like, you should still be able to find this sense of community. And John is just like, no, that's not the reason. The reason is you feel at a place. And that's the other thing he must have in the back of his mind, is that she comes home a year later, like, this isn't going to feel like her home or her community anymore, because she's going to feel like an outsider. So regardless, something has to change. Like, they can't really stay in that house. And for him, like, this house is everything, right? Like, this is his domain. This is where he feels the most comfortable. And so he's not really willing to risk all that and give that all up. John is one of those characters, because I was rooting for him. And then there were just so many instances in this episode upon a second watch where, again, I just couldn't tell if he was taking digs or if he was welcoming her back with open arms. Either way, like, there's a problem here. So they're sitting there and they're talking about home. And at one point, Mira kind of makes this realization, like, hey, really, loneliness is, solitude is something to be proud of. It's not really about the things. Like, you have to be okay with yourself. And that was progress. And then John's responses, like, every time he kind of talks to her, there's he kind of takes it back to college, right? He's like, no, that's BS. Remember that time you were in college and you ran back to this ex-boyfriend of yours? Like, you couldn't be alone for a second, right? Like, he's kind of calling her out. He's like, listen, this idea of solitude may be true for other people, but that's not true for you. You're somebody who runs back and who always needs somebody to be there. And I don't like that he did that, because maybe that was her reason, or maybe that's how she was before, but people's reasons change, right? And I remember in the last episode, she kept saying, you're not really listening to me. And it did feel like that at moments, right? Like, it makes me wonder, because by kind of taking what she said and referring back to college, it kind of suggests that he hasn't seen his wife as somebody who's grown. You know what I mean? He kind of sees her as the same girl that he met back in college, but people change, right? And I'm not sure how much of this change he's fully acknowledging, but he does kind of redeem himself a bit, because at some point he says, well, I'm seeing a therapist, and he kind of reads out his morning pages. So one of the exercises that his therapist told him to do is to wake up in the morning and just write down how he feels. And in kind of listening to what he was reading, at least he acknowledged his own toxicity and the role he played in sort of the demise of this marriage, because these papers revealed a lot of things, not just about him, but about just kind of people in general, right? Because he says he grew up with a very strict father and anxious mother, and so he had this inherent loneliness inside him. He never felt like anybody understood him or that he could talk to anybody until he met Mira. So he kind of projected everything onto Mira, right? He really saw her as someone that could take him out of that loneliness. And as he's reading his morning pages, he kind of comes to the conclusion that, this was not true, right? Like, he was kind of here, not here. Like, that loneliness was still inside him, because ultimately, happiness, you cannot rely on other people to make you happy, right? Like, you have to be happy. And it seems like John kind of came to that conclusion at the end. And he says something interesting. He's not a victim anymore, right? Like, he's not a victim. He doesn't feel sorry for himself. And it shows, right? So if he's not a victim, what does he want? It seems like he wants power, right? Like, he's no longer this guy kind of, he does have an air of confidence about him in this episode, especially when you contrast it to the last episode that you really believe. And so as they're talking, they almost end up having sex, and I find it really interesting, Mira's desperation, because she's really trying to like seduce him, right? Like, she's like, oh, you make me so this and that, and she's really trying to pull him in, and he kind of pulls back, and I was impressed by the fact that he pulled back. He's like, listen, girl, like, you need to know what I've been through for the last year. And he kind of tells her, he's like, the last year has been hell. I've been a zombie. I wanted you to die. I wanted our daughter to die. Like, and I felt bad for John, because he was the one dealing with the parenting, and he had to deal with his own trauma as well. And she just kind of left, right? She just came to visit. But he was the one dealing with it day to day, the rejection, the parenting. Like, he was dealing with a lot of stress. So he's like, listen, like, maybe we'll have sex, but in the end, we'll go right back to the bottom. And I do relate to what John was saying, because so much work goes back into piecing yourself together after something traumatic has happened. And so it takes so much work to build yourself up, and it takes one moment to completely destroy it, right? And so I felt that when he's like, you know what, I'm not going back to the bottom, right? It takes one mistake to undo like years of work, right? 1 year, 2 years, it doesn't matter what it is. It takes a second to ruin that. And so she's kind of looking like she was defeated, right? Like, it didn't work. And, it seemed like her desperation was kind of increasing a bit. That whole conversation obviously kind of completely killed the mood. And just before Mira leaves, like, this scene of her kind of walking away from him, when you contrast it to the last episode where she couldn't wait to leave, right? Like, she grabbed her suitcase and she ran. She literally ran out the door. This time she was so reluctant to leave. She was so nervous, like, and so just as she's leaving, she kind of runs back to him, right? She's hugging him this time, where instead of him hugging her, right? And it's the same desperation I felt, right? Like, he hugged her like, please don't go, and now she's hugging him like, please don't go. And he was nice enough to let her back in the house, and they kind of share a bed, and the bed is of course smaller because they're no longer upstairs. And this whole bed scene was so awkward, because John's girlfriend calls, because I guess he had been seeing someone, and there was a lot of weird things to read into this, because at first I just thought it was this awkward moment, because he picks up the phone, and not only does he pick up the phone, he breaks up with this girl over the phone, and Mira can hear it. And I'm not sure what kind of message he was trying to send. Maybe I'm overrating it, but was he trying to say like, listen, I'm being transparent, I broke up. Maybe you should tell me about your breakup, Mira. Because again, Mira and Polly are not together, and he knows this, right? So I'm not sure what was the point of breaking up with this girl for his ex, you know, for everybody to hear. But that was such an awkward conversation. I feel bad for whoever John was talking to over the phone. They were hella rejected. They seemed really attached to Jonathon because they're like, you said you would call me. So I don't know what kind of relationship was going on there, but you guys let me know. And Mira is elated, right? Mira's reaction is really interesting because I don't know if you've ever had a friend that gets bad news, but it's good news for you. And you're like, oh, that's so sad that happened to you. But deep down, you're like, yay. And so Mira had that kind of like, yay, I'm so happy this didn't work out. Like, are you sure you don't want to, you know, it's such a shame and blah, blah, blah. And she's kind of giving him couples counseling. And at some point, John just totally snaps, right? He snaps and he calls her out. He can't hide it anymore. He's like, girl, you are chaos and detachment. You are a mess. You're not fooling anyone. And it is true. Like, Mira is on a breaking point. She kind of came to Jonathon in desperation. But at the same time, Jonathon, you know, the foundation of their relationship is not a healthy one, because it seemed like both of them needed saving, right? Like, Jonathon was lonely and she needed stability. And so they came together, it seemed, on the basis that they always had somebody there for them. Like, they knew they would never be alone if they were together. Like, somebody is always going to come back. Like, they're always going to be there for each other, which in this context is not good, right? Like, one of y'all has to leave. And so Jonathon gets so fed up, he's like, let me play something for you. And when he played this audio tape, I lost some respect. I didn't know what to think of Jonathon, because this whole conversation, he knew that this Polly guy broke up with her. Granted, Mira could have told him on the outset, but it does change the conversation quite a bit if you watch the episode a second time. So he plays the tape, and it seems like this Polly guy not only broke up with her, but he wants nothing to do with her. It seems like this was a toxic relationship, and as we knew, it wasn't going to work out. But he was like, you need to work it out with your wife. Like, this ain't none of my business. I just want you to know. She probably already told you. Like, it seemed like he was covering his bases. Like, there was this. And so he's playing the audio tape, and you're kind of listening, and you're like, Jonathon, what was your motivation in because I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he really wanted to leave the relationship, he could have just confronted her right at the start, right? Like, why did he wait till the end after all these things were said? So again, like, upon hearing that and the fact that he waited to tell her this, I don't think Jonathon is somebody who wants to leave this marriage. I think they have such a weird relationship that's based on, like, always having somebody there, you know? That it's just, you know, they both need something. They're both getting something out of it. And so Mira, her face at the end, because Ava comes in and she's like, oh, like, I heard Polly over the phone. And I don't know, I guess this guy was like a second dad over this year. He was cooking for her. He was doing all these things. That's a whole other weird storyline. But Mira's face at the end, like, she shook. You know, he kind of called her bluff, right? He's like, the reason you're here isn't because you're a changed person. It's because you've come crawling back to me, and you know I'm always going to be here for you. And from what it looks like, he will always be there for her, right? He really is not giving off the energy that he's going to leave her anytime soon. And so it makes you wonder, like, what's his motive, right? Like, why? I think he said it beautifully in those morning pages. He's somebody who's never felt seen. And for him, like, he invested so much into Mira that letting her go is not even within his scope, right? And you can see that in this ending. You can see that in the house. There's just a lot of sides. So you guys let me know what you think. Did this episode, like, I know that Mira is trash for doing what she did, but Jonathon isn't entirely innocent either, in my opinion. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.